Hey, Monica here. Thanks for listening to this clip from our full podcast. Before we get too far into sorting out which vampires sparkle or who falls in love with their slayer, I want to talk about the time that vampires terrorized Eastern Europe. There was this thing called the Great Vampire Pandemic. I think we're all familiar with the word pandemic now. And this was a term that was given to this epidemic, if you will, post facto, after the fact, many, many years later. But basically, in Eastern Europe, people were being plagued by something. It wasn't the plague. What was happening is they were dying of rabies. There was a rabies outbreak, and they didn't really know what rabies was. So when these people were snarling and foaming at the mouth and biting people, can you believe that? They were biting people. They needed something to blame it on, and they didn't know about viruses. Rabies is a virus. So they thought for sure that it had to be something supernatural.
Can you basically reference for me vampire traits and characteristics of rabies so that I can link why someone would see that in their head?
This was really fascinating to me. So picture this. Somebody gets bitten by a wolf, which was actually pretty common. The wolf is rabid, you don't know it, but you know that the wolf is acting really weird compared to the other wolves. All of a sudden, the person who got bit in the next 24 hours is acting just like this animal. And they have an aversion to sunlight suddenly. Now, that is actually a symptom of rabies.
Oh, wow.
Yes, because both your olfactory and your ocular systems go into hyperdrive. So that's also where we get vampires hate garlic, because you know garlic is very smelly. So because it had such a strong smell, it had a strong reaction. Sunlight is strong. So there's a strong reaction. And in fact, even looking in the mirror, they'd see this snarling form and they'd recoil from the mirror. So someone who is foaming at the mouth bites someone else, the next day they are foaming at the mouth. So they could see that there was cause and effect. Now, here's one that really, really gets me. Now, when we think about vampires, we've already mentioned it a little bit. We think they're sexy and have sex appeal. Well, not that people with rabies were sexy, but but they had hypersexuality. It's because it affected the limbic system, which controls your emotions and behaviors. That is also why they were really erratic. And another thing that would happen that I would say goes into the vampire folklore that we all know and love is that a vampire sleeps and then wakes up when you get near it. And that is actually something, sadly, that happened to people with rabies. What they would do is they would fall into a coma shortly before death. But a lot of times those people would wake suddenly from the coma and just have a crazy manic spell before they were paralyzed and in the coma and then passed away.
Oh, wow.
So you can see why people in the Balkans in the 1700s thought that there were vampires, to be quite honest with you, because they didn't have the benefit of understanding disease the way we do today. So that was the Great Vampire Pandemic of Eastern Europe. Now, the one that happened in the 1800s in New England, and there's many newspaper articles talking about the various vampires that were dug up and killed. So the Victorian New England vampire really came about because of consumption. People still have the same type of idea as they did back when this rabies went rampant, is that once you die, you're coming back as this reanimated corpse and you're causing bad things to happen to people, so we need to dig up this body. So this starts to come into play with some of how do you get rid of a vampire.
I mean, there are many ways to do that, right?
Yes. So 3 of the ways that come from folklore are cutting off their heads, stabbing them in the heart with
second favorite,
a wooden stake, or really anything you had available, let's be honest.
All right.
But I don't know when it gets whittled down to wood, no pun intended.
A chair leg.
Exactly. Whatever's available.
Right.
And then burning the body or the organs. And I would say that, as we know, those are three main ways to get rid of vampires. I will say that this subject, and I think that you can speak to this too, with there being 26,000 plus books alone written about vampires, is that it is very, very deep, even in the folklore. So I did my best to just kind of provide the surface of where we get this really great villain, antagonist, and sometimes even protagonist.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe if you want more conspiracies, weird history, true crime, and fun facts.